If you were to ask a small child to draw a car, they wouldn't draw a Pagani Zonda. They wouldn't draw a Lamborghini with its doors pointing at the stars, and they certainly wouldn't draw a Citroen, because children have a natural sense of dignity. No, they would draw a box. Then they would draw a slightly smaller box on top of that and 4 circles at the corners. And what they would have drawn, quite by accident, is the Toyota Corolla. Specifically, the 2005 model. To the sort of people who organize their spice racks alphabetically, this is known as the E120. Now, we need to be honest here. Usually, as automotive journalists, we like to talk about soul. We like to talk about passion. We like to talk about the way the steering whispers to your fingertips through a corner. The Corolla has none of these things. Its steering doesn't whisper to you. It barely acknowledges you're in the room. It has the soul of a high-end industrial dishwasher. And yet, it is quite possibly the most important piece of machinery ever built by human hands. In physics, there is something called the Standard Model. It explains how the entire universe works. In the automotive world, the 2005 Corolla is that model. While the Italians were busy building cars that looked like supermodels but had the temperament of a caffeinated wasp, and while the British were building cars that would spontaneously liquefy if they saw a rain cloud, Toyota was doing something far more radical. They were building a car that simply worked. The 2005 Corolla didn't care if you hadn't changed the oil since the Bush administration. It didn't care if the floorboards were covered in melted crayons and regret. It just started every single time. By 2005, the Corolla wasn't just a car. It was a global plague. It was being built in 16 different countries. It was being sold in over 140. It was the vehicular equivalent of the common cold. It was ubiquitous. It was unstoppable. And it was found in every single corner of the planet. But unlike a cold, people actually wanted it. They didn't buy it because they wanted to feel the wind in their hair or the G-forces in their gut. They bought it because they had a job to get to, children to drop off, and a deep-seated desire never, ever to speak to a recovery truck driver named Dave. This is the story of the machine that conquered the world, not with a bang, but with a very quiet, very reliable hum. To understand the 2005 Corolla, you have to look under the bonnet. But don't expect to find any carbon fiber or gold leaf or anything that looks remotely expensive. What you'll find instead is a lump of metal known as the 1.8-liter 1ZZFE. Now, to a petrolhead, those letters and numbers are about as evocative as a barcode on a pack of frozen peas. But in the world of engineering, this engine is a masterpiece. It featured something Toyota called VVT-i. That stands for variable valve timing with intelligence. I suspect they added the word intelligence just to spite the Americans, who at the time were still building engines that had the brain power of a sandwich. The 1ZZFE produced 130 horsepower, which, let's be honest, is not a lot. A modern blender probably has more grunt. But that wasn't the point. The point was how it delivered that power. It was smooth, it was linear, and it was quite literally unburstable. You see, most engines are designed to last about 100,000 miles before they decide to turn into a heap of scrap metal. This Toyota engine, however, was designed by people who clearly expected their customers to keep driving forever. It used a timing chain instead of a rubber belt. Why? Because rubber breaks and chains do not. It had a multi-point fuel injection system that was so precise it could make a single drop of fuel last from London to the moon. And then there was the transmission.
In 2005, you could have a 5-speed manual, which was fine, or you could have the 4-speed automatic. Now, a 4-speed automatic in the 21st century sounds like a joke. It's slow, it's dim-witted, it shifts gears with the urgency of a sloth on Valium. But here is the thing. Because it only had 4 gears, those gears were made of stuff. Heavy, thick, indestructible stuff. You could drive this car through a swamp. You could tow a house with it. You could fill the gearbox with sand and spite, and it would still keep shifting. It is the only piece of machinery on Earth that I am convinced could survive a direct hit from a meteor and still make it to the local garden center in time for tea. Now, we must discuss the looks. When you look at a Ferrari, your heart rate goes up. When you look at an old Jaguar, you feel a sudden urge to buy a tweed jacket and steal some lead from a church roof. But when you look at a 2005 Corolla, nothing happens. Your brain simply deletes the image to save space for more important information, like the use-by date on a carton of milk. I am convinced that the designers at Toyota didn't use clay models, or wind tunnels, or even pencils. No, they used a spreadsheet. They looked at the average human height. They looked at the average width of a grocery bag, and then they instructed a computer to wrap a layer of steel around those dimensions as tightly as possible. The result was a shape inspired entirely by a bar of soap. It was tall, it was narrow, and it was designed with one goal in mind. Not beauty, not elegance, but aerodynamics. You see, because the engine only had the power of a damp firework, the body had to be as slippery as an eel in a bucket of lard, just to help it reach 60 miles per hour before the sun went down. By 2005, they had given it a facelift. Now, in the world of supercars, a facelift involves massive spoilers and vents that could swallow a passing cyclist. At Toyota, a facelift meant they gave it teardrop headlights. Ooh, how radical! They also added a tiny bit of premium plastic chrome to the grille to let the neighbors know that you were a person of substance, a person who had promoted themselves from the basic model to the one with luxury hubcaps. The 2005 Corolla is the only car in history that is physically impossible to find in a multi-story car park. You could park it, walk 10 feet away, turn around, and it would have already blended into the concrete. It is the ultimate stealth machine, not because it's fast or quiet, but because it is so profoundly, aggressively boring that the human eye simply refuses to acknowledge its existence. If the exterior of the 2005 Corolla was designed to be invisible, the interior was designed to be unchanging. Stepping inside is like stepping into a time capsule from a period when the world was a much calmer place. There are no touchscreens, there are no haptic sliders, there are no menus hidden inside menus, hidden inside a digital subfolder. Everything, and I mean everything, is exactly where a human being with 2 hands and a brain would expect it to be. The volume knob is a knob. The air conditioning controls are dials. You could be blindfolded in the middle of a hurricane and you would still be able to find the hazard light button on your first attempt. And then there is the color. Toyota's interior designers clearly spent years and millions of yen researching every single shade of gray known to man. They found overcast sky gray, wet pavement gray, and my personal favorite, deeply depressing industrial filing cabinet gray. Everything you touch is plastic, but it isn't cheap plastic. Oh no, this is Toyota plastic. It feels like it was harvested from the shell of an immortal tortoise. You could attack this dashboard with a hammer, and the hammer would probably shatter, leaving the dashboard completely unscathed. Then we have the seats. In 2005, Toyota was still obsessed with a material called velour. It's not quite cloth, and it's certainly not leather. It's like sitting on a very large, very supportive gray teddy bear. It's comfortable, it's durable, and it is remarkably good at hiding the stains of 1,000 spilled lattes. In the back, there is space. Not limousine space, but enough space for 3 shouting children and a dog to sit in relative peace while you drive to a car boot sale. It is a masterpiece of logic. It's not exciting, it's not luxurious, but as a place to spend 4 hours of your life stuck in traffic on the M25, it is, quite possibly, the most sensible place on Earth.
It's a cockpit for people who have better things to do than figure out how to turn on their headlights. Now, usually, a Toyota Corolla is about as sporty as a pair of orthopedic shoes. But in 2005, something very strange happened. It was as if the librarians in the Toyota engineering department had finished their shift, gone to the pub, and decided, to hell with it, let's give them some power. The result was the Corolla XRS. To look at it, you wouldn't think much had changed. It had slightly larger wheels, a tiny spoiler, and a badge that looked like it had been stolen from a much more interesting car. But under the bonnet was a miracle. Instead of the usual, sensible, plodding engine, they fitted the 2ZZGE. This was a high-revving 1.8-liter masterpiece, co-developed with Yamaha. And here is the kicker. It was the exact same engine that you found in the back of a lot of a Lotus Elise. In a Lotus, this engine makes sense. In a Corolla, it is frankly absurd. It had something called VVT-i. The L stands for lift, and what that meant was that at 6,000 RPM, the engine would suddenly change its mind about being a Corolla and decide it was a screaming banshee. The power didn't just arrive, it exploded. It produced 170 horsepower, and it kept on revving all the way to 8,200 RPM. Think about that. 8,000 revs in a car designed for people who think that 60 miles per hour is a bit risky. To cope with this sudden madness, they gave it a 6-speed manual gearbox and Yamaha-tuned dampers. They even added a strut tower brace to stop the car from literally shaking itself apart with the sheer shock of going fast. It was a total anomaly. It was a Corolla that could actually go around a corner without falling over. It was a Corolla that could embarrass a GTI at the traffic lights. It was the one and only time that the most boring car in the world was allowed to have a soul. Naturally, because the world is a cruel place, hardly anyone bought one. Because if you wanted a Corolla, you didn't want 8,000 revs. And if you wanted 8,000 revs, you didn't want a Corolla. It remains, to this day, one of the greatest sleeper cars ever made. If you were to take a Ferrari to a racetrack, it would dance. If you took a Porsche to a mountain pass, it would sing. If you take a 2005 Corolla to a challenging piece of B-road, it will simply sigh. It will look at you with its teardrop headlights and ask, "Why are we doing this? There is a perfectly good motorway 3 miles that way." You see, the dynamics of a standard Corolla are best described as absent. Let's start with the steering. It uses an electric power steering rack, and I'm convinced that instead of being connected to the wheels by metal rods, it's connected by gummy bears. There is no feel, there is no feedback. You turn the wheel, and eventually the car decides to change direction. It's not a conversation, it's a formal request,
submitted in writing 3 weeks in advance. Then there is the suspension. Toyota's engineers clearly decided that the roads of the world were far too bumpy, so they fitted the Corolla with springs made of marshmallows. The result is a magic carpet ride. If you are driving over a pothole or a speed bump or a fallen tree, you won't feel a thing. It's incredibly comfortable. It's like sitting in your favorite armchair while being gently wafted along by a summer breeze. However, if you try to go around a corner at anything more than walking pace, something alarming happens. The car leans. It leans so much that the door handles are in danger of scraping the tarmac. It doesn't grip, it just understeers. It pushes its nose toward the nearest hedge as if it's trying to find a quiet place to have a lie down. And the acceleration? Well, calling it acceleration is a bit like calling a light drizzle a hurricane. In the 4-speed automatic, 0 to 60 takes eons. You don't measure it with a stopwatch, you measure it with a calendar. You floor the throttle, the engine makes a polite, droning
noise, and the speedometer needle begins a very slow, very dignified crawl toward the right. But here's the thing. This car wasn't built to break lap records. It was built to be stress-free. It's for people who find driving a chore. And in that regard, it is a total success. It is a car that requires 0 effort to drive. And in a world of complex, angry, aggressive machines, there is something quite lovely about that. One of the most extraordinary things about the 2005 Corolla is that depending on where you were in the world, it was a completely different car. Toyota didn't just build one Corolla and ship it everywhere. No, they looked at the different tribes of the human race and they built a Corolla for each of them. If you lived in Southeast Asia, in places like Thailand or the Philippines, you didn't just buy a Corolla, you bought the Corolla Altis. Now, to look at it, the Altis was fancy. It had more chrome on the front than a 1950s refrigerator. Inside, it had wood trim that looked like it had been harvested from a very cheap, very plastic forest. It was meant to be a mini Lexus. It was for the aspiring businessman who wanted the world to know he had made it, but he still, fundamentally, didn't want his car to break down. However, if you were in Europe, things were stranger. The Europeans, for reasons known only to themselves, don't like sedans. They think they are old-fashioned. So Toyota gave them the Corolla hatchback. It was shorter, it was stumpier, and it looked like it was permanently angry. It was designed to compete with the Volkswagen Golf. It had firmer suspension, more European steering, and it came with a variety of diesel engines that sounded like a bag of spanners being thrown down a flight of stairs, but would, of course, last for 1 billion years. But the prize for the weirdest variation goes to Japan. In Japan, they had the Corolla Fielder. This was an estate version, a wagon, and some of them were actually quite cool. You could get them with 4-wheel drive. You could get them with adventure body kits. There was even a version called the Run X, which sounds like a brand of high-performance sneakers, but was actually just a hatchback with a different badge. Then there was the Matrix. In North America, Toyota took the Corolla's sensible bones and dressed them up in a funky, tall, crossover-ish body. It was for people who wanted to look like they had an active lifestyle, even if the most active thing they did was drive to the pharmacy. It is a testament to Toyota's global dominance. They managed to take one humble, boring, reliable platform and camouflage it so perfectly that everyone on Earth felt like it was built just for them. It wasn't just a car, it was a chameleon, a beige, unburstable chameleon. If you were a parent in 2005 and your teenage son or daughter had just passed their driving test, you had a very important decision to make. You could buy them something cool like a Mini Cooper, but then you'd spend every night awake worrying that they'd end up wrapped around a telephone pole. Or you could do the sensible thing. You could buy them a Corolla. You see, Toyota didn't just build the Corolla to be reliable. They built it to be a fortress. By 2005, they had stuffed it full of things that today we take for granted, but back then, this was serious tech. It had ABS as standard. It had electronic brake force distribution, which is a very clever way of making sure the car stops in a straight line, even if you were panicking and trying to avoid a stray sheep. But the real magic was the airbags. In the high-spec models, you didn't just get one for the driver and one for the passenger. Oh no, you got side curtain airbags. If you were hit from the side, the Corolla would instantly turn its interior into a giant gray bouncy castle. It was as if the car was saying, "Don't worry, I've got you." And then there was the visibility. In a modern car, looking out of the back window is like looking through the slit of a letterbox. The pillars are huge and the windows are tiny, but the 2005 Corolla was a glass house. The pillars were thin, the windows were enormous. You could see everything. You didn't need parking sensors or 36-degree cameras or a satellite uplink to know where the curb was. You just looked out of the window. What a concept. Toyota also engineered something called crumple zones. Now, lots of manufacturers talked about crumple zones, but when Toyota did it, they did it with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. In a crash, the front of the Corolla would fold up like a piece of origami, absorbing all the energy, while the passenger cell, the bit where you were sitting, remained completely rigid. The result? The 2005 Corolla consistently earned top marks in crash tests. It was a car that didn't just protect your wallet, it protected you. It was, quite simply, the most responsible car on the road. It was a car designed by people who understood that the most important feature of any vehicle is that the people inside it get home for dinner. There is a theory in science that after a nuclear holocaust, the only things left on Earth will be Keith Richards and cockroaches. I'd like to add a third item to that list, the 2005 Toyota Corolla. We live in a disposable age. Your smartphone is designed to die after 2 years. Your washing machine is designed to self-destruct the moment the warranty expires. But the 2005 Corolla was built with a different philosophy. It was built to last. I have seen these cars with 300,000 miles on the clock. I have heard stories of them reaching 500,000. And when you look at them, they don't look like they are dying. They just look a bit dusty. How did Toyota do it? Well, it comes down to a Japanese word, kaizen. It means continuous improvement. Toyota didn't try to reinvent the wheel every time they built a car. They took things that already worked and they made them better. The 2005 model was built at the NUMI plant in California and the Takaoka plant in Japan, and the people on those assembly lines were obsessed. If a single bolt was 1 millimeter out of place, they would stop the entire factory. They used higher quality steel. They used thicker gaskets. They used connectors that didn't corrode. They engineered the car so that even if you were, shall we say, negligent with your maintenance, the car would forgive you. You could forget to change the oil for a year. You could ignore the air filter until it was clogged with the hair of 1,000 cats. You could drive it through a flood, and the next morning you would turn the key and the engine would go boom, and it would start. It is the only car I know of where the check engine light is basically an urban legend. Most Corolla owners don't even know what it looks like because they've never seen it.
The only thing that can truly kill a 2005 Corolla is a direct hit from a meteor, or possibly salt. If you live in a place where they salt the roads in winter, eventually, after 25 years, the car might turn back into the earth. But even then, I'm convinced that if you found a rusted-out Corolla in a field and gave the engine a bit of a kick, it would still start. It is a miracle of mechanical stubbornness. It is a car that refuses to accept the concept of the end.